So what I've done is temporarily put the cover back on this side, because we've got to get the timing top dead centre. We've got to get the piston at top dead centre so we can set the valves, and that's done via this hole here, and on the top of this you can just see there a little groove, and that groove, hopefully you can see that. Yep, there you go. So that groove just there is our timing mark, and if I grab the torch, hopefully you'll be able to see in there what I've done is I've aligned the T mark, which is top dead center, with that groove. Okay, and that has to be on the compression stroke. So what I've done there is I've turned the engine over using the bolt on the rotor and the crankshaft, which is what it says to do in the manual, and I've made sure we're at top dead center on the compression stroke. And then now we can set our tappets or adjustments here. So these are done with a lock nut and this extremely little fiddly adjuster on the top. I don't know why they make them so small, to be honest. I thought Hondas were bad, but I think these are even worse. So that's the next thing to do. So I need to check the book, find out what the clearances should be. So on the inlet or intake, we're meant to have between 0.05 and 0.1 of a millimetre. So I've set, or the feeler gauge I've got is 0.05. So we're going to go with that. So let's do this one first. So I'm going to set that, and then what I'll do this time is I'll just hold that in place while I do the lock nut up. Okay, let's try that. I would say that feels better. Yeah, so when that's going in and out of there now, I can feel a little bit of resistance on the feeler gauge going in and out, which is where it needs to be. I don't want to do it too tight on this because we're at the very bottom of the adjustment. So 0.05 is this feeler gauge, and it goes from 0.05 up to 0.1 of a millimetre. I really don't want that to be too tight. So nice light drag on that. And then just to double check that, you can feel a little bit of movement in that. So I'm happy with that. I'm going to, although it's a single cylinder engine, you've got two inlet or intake valves, and you've got two exhaust valves. The two inlet valves are set at the same 0.05 to 0.1 millimetre. The two exhaust valves, which are around this side, according to the manual, are set at 0.12 to 0.17. So there's a larger clearance on these than there is on these. So they're all set at top dead centre, because we're only going to we'll have to carry on. We'll have to keep moving the crankshaft around to get it in the right place, or the camshaft, I should say, to get it in the right place. Set different sets of tappets, so it's relatively straightforward, if not somewhat fiddly. So I'll carry on doing that, and then we'll come back afterwards. To go on are the exhaust tappet covers and the inlet tappet cover as well. These have all had new O-ring seals on them, came with the gasket set, and let's just turn into here. I swear doing things on camera is twice as hard as it is when you're doing it off camera. Okay, so they need to be up to 10 Newton meters. torque wrench set to 10 Newton meters. That's that one. That seemed a bit loose, but let me just check that is correct. 10 Newton meters. Yeah. Same with this one. Tweak those a bit more than that. New tappets on there. Oh, sorry, new gaskets on there, I should say. I did polish these previously. We've got a little bit tarnished set in the box, but I'll be fine with a bit of water sol on them. Quite nice. And then the intake cover, because the valves are close together, I'm having two of these. All it's got is this cover, and it's got an arrow that says up on it, so we better follow that. And again, new O-ring gasket on here, and that just drops onto the top. And then there are 2 Allen bolts through there holding that in place. And again, 10 Newton meters for this as well. Bed those down. On the right socket. There we go. No, I don't want a socket, do I? What do I want? I want my Allen connect. There we go. 10 Newton meters again. Happy days. That's that. Next up is the tacho drive. So the tacho drive on this is taken from the end of the camshaft, and that groove sits in the end of the camshaft. The whole thing's sealed by an O-ring, which I haven't changed yet, but I'm guessing there's one in the kit. I'll have a look in a second. And then the tacho drive cable sits into here, secured by this screw, and the whole assembly is held on with one bolt. So there was an O-ring in the gasket set for this, so I've done that. I've put a bit of grease around this just to make that easier to slide in. And this groove has to line up with the slot in the camshaft in there, and then that whole thing gets pushed home. There we go. That's clicked into place, and then we've got one screw which I'll put a bit of copper grease on, which goes in there to hold that together. So only the one screw, and 10 Newton meters again for that. Oops, get it the right way up. Okay, and then so this screw, which is already in place, ready, is for where the tacho cable itself goes in there. I've taken the spring off this. I don't know if you noticed the spring was on there earlier. I've taken it off because it kept falling off, but once it's under tension, once the cable was on there, it holds, the spring stays in place. So I can't find anything in the manual that specifies the spark plug gap, oddly, but we're going to replace the spark plug with a DPR8EA, which is the one specified. The gap looks fine to me. Normally you'd expect it to be anything sort of 0.8, 0.9. I would say that's roughly what that is. So if I could find my spark plug spanner. Yeah, it's a long way down. So again, it's one of those things, it's easier to put in when the engine's out of the frame. Okay, that's finger tight. And normally you give it a quarter of a turn once it's been in, but as it's new, you need to compress the. That's 17.5 Newton meters, which is quite a lot. my opinion. I'm not going to go any more than that. That's fine. Then if we take that out and put it back in, you literally just put it in, give it a quarter of a turn, and that's it, because it's now compressed the little washer that's on the spark plug. Okay, so that's in place. There's no cap with that. Doesn't need one of this. Doesn't come with one. So that's done. That can now go in the bin. Or the box can go in the bin. So where are we at? We've done a fair bit there, really, getting this all back together. We put our piston on, rings, barrel, head, rocker cover assembly, set all of the set the tappets up, set the timing, of course, before we did all of that, using the timing marks on the rotor. Cam chain tensioner we put back in, tappets all set up, tacho drive put in, spark plug put in. So I suppose now I've got to decide how far I want to go, because I could, in theory, I think this is sort of ready now to put back in. I did take it out as a complete engine with all the covers on, even with the kickstart lever in. And actually, to be fair, it made it quite easy to pick up and move around because I could hold onto the kickstart lever. So I am tempted to put it all back on. All right, next to go on is the stator cover. I've had the stator out of this because I've polished the cover, but I've put that back in. That's just held in with 4 screws. Then there's a large rubber grommet that stops any ingress of water. Then you've got your pickup for the ignition coil, I should say, and then this lead, which you have to make sure is running through this passage, is for the neutral light switch. So as far as preparation goes for this, we've got a dowel which sits in there. There is another dowel which goes underneath there. In this case, I think we already got it. Where's that gone? Oh yeah, there it is. Sorry, can't see for looking. Yep, so that one's already in. So only the 2 dowels. We've also got a couple of rubber O-rings to replace. There's one in there, should be one in there, which is missing, and then there's one in there which is just sat there that needs to come out. These are oil passageways. So what we do with these is we replace the grommets, we put engine oil into both these to give the engine a head start on first startup. We've then got a new gasket that goes all the way around, and then basically this drops onto there. So let's go ahead and change these grommets and get some engine oil in there. Let's check that one out of there. Give those recesses a little bit of a clean up. Grab our new O-rings. There should be 2. Yep. So one of those sits to what we'll do, just to hold those in place so we know they're not going to drop out when we're putting the case on. We'll just stick some bit of grease on those. And that one sits. Clearly doesn't sit in there because it's too big. It's the same size as that one. They're different sizes. They got fitted. Well, it does go in there. Tell a light. That one does look too big. Is there a different one in the packet? Oh yeah. Sometimes until you get these out and you try them, they just look the same size. That's that one. Let's try that one instead. Some grease on that one. There we go, that's better. That's the right size. Excuse me. Right, that's those in. So dowels are on, dowels in up there, and I'm just going to do what I normally do. We need to put our new gasket on there now. I'm just going to smear some grease around this face. Just makes it easier. So I get the gasket off next time. Certainly not essential, but just something I like to do. What you shouldn't do is put silicone on with paper gaskets, because the silicone doesn't really compress, it just pushes the gasket out of place. You could put well seal on. Well seal was old school really, used on old British bikes, but it's sort of does the same job as the grease in that it's non-setting, so it just stays tacky. Makes the cases easier to separate. Right, so our gasket gets the right way around. Looks like it's going to drop on like that. There we go. In fact, let's take that down out of there, look, and just pop it in there. It'll go in. Because then we've got two locating dowels, and then hopefully that'll make things easier when we come to put it on the case. Yeah, most of those holes seem to be lining up pretty well. I'll say so far this gasket set has been pretty good. A bit of grease on there. Just do need to make sure that neutral light switch doesn't pop out there. Okay, so last thing to do before we actually put these halves together is take our engine oil, and so we've got oil ways in here, and it's just suggesting we put some engine oil in there, and also in this one. Okay, there we go, that's done that. And now, so just checking that, a bit of jiggery pokery, orientation. that's the magnet in the rotor pulling the stator in. Let's make sure that's still in place. Yeah, that's gone in. I don't like that. I mean, that gasket is sticking out there so far, it's ridiculous. There's just too much material on that. Don't like that. But not much we can do about it, I'm afraid. Right, that's coming out quite nicely, so I'm happy with that. It's not trapped, it moves. Wires are coming out of there. Yeah, okay. So that's on. Now it's a question of getting our screws in there and bolting this up, which we do in a typical sort of diagonal rough pattern, just to try and pull the case in nice and flat, so we don't warp anything. Right, I'll just put the engine onto its side for a minute while I torque these down. It's just easier than trying to get underneath it. So 10 Newton meters again, and we're doing these in a diagonal fashion. Lose track of which ones you've done and which ones you haven't. Let's go with that one up there. Okay, that one and that one get done up when the cover goes on. There's a little cover that goes on that. I've also reconnected the neutral light switch down here as well. So apart from the cover that goes over the crankshaft bolt and the timing inspection cover, that's that side of it done. So next to go on is the clutch cover, or right hand side cover. Covers the clutch basket, and just before we put this on, it's just worth talking about the fact that this engine is a dry sump engine, so the oil doesn't sit in the bottom of the engine as it would in a wet sump engine. It sits in the separate oil tank, which we've already put onto the bike. And a dry sump engine has some advantages over a wet sump engine, and that's what one of the things that drew me to the bike in the first place. One of the advantages is that because there's no sump as such in the bottom of this engine, the engine can sit lower in the frame, giving a lower centre of gravity. Because the oil is contained in a separate oil tank, you can have effectively more oil, which should help to keep the engine cooler, or the oil temperature down. From a racing perspective, imagine going round a corner and braking sharply and accelerating sharply. The oil in the bottom of a wet sump engine is going backwards and forwards and up and down and left and right, possibly sometimes to an extent that the oil pump is dragging air in, aerating the oil, and then it's losing its lubrication properties. So from a racing perspective, it's better to have a dry sump than it is to have a wet sump. However, it does come with, or can come with, one major disadvantage, and that is that you can have a dry sump engine that wet sumps. So that term, wet sumping, basically means that when the bike's been standing for a while and not being used, the oil that should be up in the oil tank, through gravity, finds its way down past the oil pump and sits in the bottom of this engine, which is not good for a dry sump engine if you try and start it. So to try and negate that, normally it happens because you can't see it on this bike, but the oil pump is down in here somewhere, and when the gears start to wear, or components start to wear, just through the effects of gravity, the oil can find its way past those gears in the oil pump and sit down in here. It tends to affect old British bikes quite a lot. The SRX600 I had, that used to wet sump until I put an SRM oil pump on there, and then that stopped it. But even with SRM oil pumps on old British bikes, it can do the same thing. So that's a long way round of basically saying that when it comes to putting this side cover on, this clutch cover on, there's a couple of things we need to be mindful of, and mainly they're to do with this area here. And we have to fit in a spring, a large ball bearing, and this seat that the ball bearing sits on. And the purpose of these components is to try and stop the oil from going past the pump and down into the sump of the engine. So we need to make sure we've got these components fitted correctly to stop that happening. So first of all, we have the spring. That's then followed by the ball bearing, which sits on the top, and then that's held in place by this cup, which is there to hold all that in, but then there's a seal around the top of that which sits around there, and that's hopefully stops this bike from wet sumping. I've got a new gasket. I've greased all around here, and we've got a couple of dowels, one here and one here. To locate that onto. There we go. That's quite a nice fit. Just make sure that it's not covering any of the oilways. Everything seems to be in place. We've also got our mechanism, which is operated by the kickstart, and this, I'll turn this over to show you. This is upside down, but basically there's a cable that runs through here, goes up to the decompression lever, and as you use the kickstart, the mechanism behind this operates this and pulls the decompression lever to make the bike easier to start. Okay, so we need to get that fitted onto the clutch side of the engine. Nothing else to go on there. I've checked everything in there, so this should now just be a push fit onto this. I have there is an oil seal here, and also an oil seal in the end of the kickstart hole, so I've greased those just so I don't damage them when this slides on. Get that lined up. Kickstart. Get that to go on nice and square. Okay. Nice and gently. No need to force anything. There we go. That clicked on quite nicely. And again, we've got this issue with these pattern gaskets where you've got these bits sticking out, which I don't particularly like. It won't be quite so bad once the screws are in, but it sort of annoys me. I don't, there doesn't seem to be any need for that to me, but it is what it is, I'm afraid. You can't get new gaskets anymore, so we have to go with what we've got. So most of the most of the clutch cover screws are now in place. They need torquing up to 10 Newton meters, but two of these screws that hold the cover on also hold on the oil cartridge, the oil filter as well, so we need to put those in. So basically what that consists of is the filter, so we've got a new filter obviously, the cover itself, and we've got a new O-ring for that. So we're going to drop the new O-ring into there, and then we'll put a little bit of grease around that just to help seal that, like so. And then our cartridge goes in this way and sits in there, and then the cover just drops on top, like so. It's not quite in properly, I don't think. Let's try it that way first. It might be a bit easier to hold it like that. Let's have a look. Yeah, that's better. And then we've got two long screws. Let's just put a bit of copperies on those. Usual situation. That one goes in there. Another long one with a bit of copperies on goes into there. So they're the two that hold the main clutch case on. So we're going to torque these up to 10 Newton meters, and they're basically going to be done in a crisscross pattern, the same as normal. I am just going to go and fetch because some of these are quite hidden away, I'm going to go and fetch an extension for this. Okay, so let's start with that one up there as we're here. And then we'll move right to the back. You have to be a little bit mindful when you're torquing things up, although you're trying to do it properly, of course, by setting the right torque setting. If it's an older engine, sometimes the screws have been off a few times, or perhaps they've corroded slightly, you can still strip the threads if you're not careful, usually in the alloy as opposed to the screw thread itself, unfortunately. But yeah, it's easily done sometimes. I've just taken a look in the parts book, and I'm trying to put this screw in, which is effectively a drain for where the oil filter is, with an O-ring on the outside, and it's just squishing. It doesn't seem right. So I've had a look in the parts book, and actually it looks like that O-ring, which I've put back on the screw to remind me that it's needed an O-ring, is actually meant to be on the inside of this, not on the outside. So we'll just flip this off again. And what I'm hoping to find inside here is a recess where the O-ring will sit. It's a problem when you've taken it apart a while ago and you try and put it back together, you don't always quite remember where everything goes. Yeah, okay. So there is a recess in there where that O-ring should have gone. So we'll just put a bit of grease on that. So I've gone back to the original, the replacement O-ring now as well out of the kit. Out of the gasket set, I should say. So that's it. We'll just set that in there. That's where that's meant to go. And then we can go back on with our. That's it. Just clicked into place. That makes more sense. Quite often when you reassemble these things, you look at it, or it doesn't feel right, and it probably isn't. It's best just to take a step back. Have a think about what you're doing. When it comes to those sorts of things where you look at it and you think, I don't know, that doesn't seem right. I can't imagine that's how it should be. The official parts manuals in particular, when it comes to reassembly, are invaluable, to be honest, because generally speaking they're laid out in such a way that you can see exactly what components go where, what fits on first, what comes off first, etc. Just makes a big difference. Okay, so that's those three back on. So we will now torque those up to 10 Newton meters, as we have with the others. Okay. Right, I'm happy with that. Final thing to do on this side is there's a little cover that goes over the decompression lever. Manual system, make sure that moves freely before you put the cover on, which it does. We are going to have to take the cover off because we've got to thread the cable into there yet, once it's back in the frame. But just so I know where it is for completeness, we'll drop that back on now just loosely. One thing I'm not very keen on on this. They obviously tried to save costs when it comes to some of these covers. This was a plastic cover, which is obviously sprayed and doesn't really match the aluminium or the alloy. Same on the other side, there's a couple of places where they've used what effectively are plastic nuts and bolts, or little covers over the timing hole and things like that, which I don't like. It'd be nice if they were made of alloy, but there you go. And then finally, so I'm just going to leave that loose, as I say, because they've got to have a cable going through there for the decompression lever anyway yet. And then final thing to go on is going to be our Kickstarter. So we will put a small amount of copper grease on that, like so. I'm going to find what I did with the Kickstarter. There it is. Okay, so there don't appear to be any kind of dots or markers for where this lines up. I suppose I probably should have marked it before I took it off, but I guess it's a question of trying to fit it as close to the case as possible so you can get as much kick as possible without it actually touching the crankcase. So it would work there. Can we go one more? No, so if we just come back to the first one, that'll be that one then. So I guess we'll go with that one. If I try and go one more spline, it's touching the cover, which obviously we don't want. So I think that'll do nicely. And the only thing that holds this on is a nut. There's no kind of grub screw or method of holding this on apart from this single nut. And I have read on some of the forums with these bikes that it's quite common for this nut to work loose and you to lose this kickstart. Hence the reason that these are quite difficult to find, and when you do find them, they're expensive. So I think what I'm going to do is, just to be on the safe side, I'm going to put a drop of standard thread locker on there. So it's just standard 243 Loctite thread locker. It's blue, which basically means that it will come apart without heat using normal tools, whereas the red one is stronger and means that you would have to use heat to get it off in theory. So we'll just put a little drop of that on there just to be on the safe side. Better safe than sorry. I don't want to get to where I'm going and then find out I've left my kickstart 3 miles down the road and I can't start the bike because of course it's got no electric start, so it's pretty important we don't lose this. Right, that needs torquing up to 50 Newton meters according to the manual. So I've got my torque wrench set to 50 Newton meters, 19 mil socket on there. So let's have a go at that. I might have to go around the other side and hold this, I think. See if I can lean across and do it without blocking your view. There we go. That doesn't actually seem that tight to me, 50 Newton meters. Perhaps this is why the people have had the problem with them falling off. Let me just double check I've got that set correctly. Newton meters, 50, follow the line over. Yeah, that's definitely 50 Newton meters. If I wasn't talking it, I'll be honest with you, I'd probably do that a bit tighter. I'm going to go a little bit tighter. I probably shouldn't, but just to be on the safe side. But say we've got Loctite on there, so we should be fine. Right, so that's that on. And actually, I'll tell you what I'm going to do. I am just going to take this cover back off because I want to make sure that when we kick the bike over that the decompression lever is doing what it's supposed to be doing, and we've got it the right side of where it's supposed to be inside. So I don't want to kick the well, as long as I can see that moving down, I'll be happy. Yeah, there it goes. So that moved down when I did that, and now you can see it returning when I come back up. Let's try that again. Yeah, that's going down and coming straight back up. That's exactly what it's supposed to be doing. Okay, I'll put that cover back on, and that's that case finished. I'm just having a lovely cup of tea, and I'm having a look around, taking a bit of time out and having a look around the engine to make sure I've got everything back on and assembled that needs to be on before it goes back in the frame. And I think I'm just about there. There's a few other ancillary bits I could put on. I probably will just fit the intake rubbers on there. And I say, yeah, I've got yet to decide whether I'm going to mount the carburetors while it's just in the frame on, say, one bolt, and then try and swing the engine up so the carburetors go into the air filter at the back. I think that might be easier than trying to wriggle them in afterwards, because they were quite difficult to get out, if I remember rightly. So we'll take a view on that when we're back at the bike. I think we'll probably go for putting this bolt in first, and that means I can then pivot the engine up and down on the stand I've got if I need to. But yeah, I think we're pretty much there. Everything that needs to go on has gone on. I've just gone round and I've double checked all the torque settings on all of the bolts. The oil tank is back in the bike, and I can connect the oil lines up when this is back in. So this is pretty much at the stage it was when I took it out of the frame. So I'm just going to give this one more check over, have a look in the manual, see if there's any frame fixings that I need to put back on the frame before I start putting this back in the frame. But yeah, I think so that'll be the end of this video, and so the next video should be me putting the engine back in the frame and getting that side of things done. So thank you very much for watching the video. If you've liked it, please give it a thumbs up down below, subscribe to the channel, and there'll be more videos coming along very soon.